So it's rare that we might take a Sunday sermon time and devote it really to remembering the life of one person. But I think if any one person embodied the best of our aspirations as human beings in the world, and also as followers of Jesus Christ, Congressman John Lewis merits that kind of attention. His entire life, he saw as a life that he gave back to the world in service to others. And, if you read, I've read, his memoir, the graphic memoirs, several other writings about him. From the earliest of his years, he felt called to ministry. Apparently, he used to preach to the farmyard animals in his home in rural Alabama. His family teased him mercilessly about preaching to the chickens. He, even at a very early age, was never seen without his Bible, and really felt called to make change in the world because of his relationship with Jesus Christ. And it is a sad day for our country to lose him as a leader. But I do want to note that this is not a day of mourning or in the conventional sense. We are not reacting to a life cut short, taken by violence, but we are celebrating a life well lived, a life of aspiration, a life of inspiration, a life of commitment. And though it's fine to feel sad, it's also okay to feel celebration that this is a person who touched more lives than many of the more famous people who held public office, higher public office throughout his life. And we are not celebrating the end of his life, but we are celebrating the continuation of the influence that he had on many others. So he knew even at an early age that he would be engaged in this work of social change. He corresponded with Dr. King while he was still in high school, who sent him a bus ticket to come and participate in trainings for nonviolence and peaceful protest, that he was a philosophy he was deeply committed to throughout his entire life. And his first activity as an activist was participating in sit-ins, in integrating lunch counters in Nashville, where he was going to school. And then he became a freedom rider. And his first arrest was in 1961. Just last week was the anniversary of it. And it was a legacy he was proud of. He was arrested 45 times in his life. But his first arrest was for trying to integrate the Greyhound bus terminal in Jackson, Mississippi. He and several others. They were arrested, they were beaten in public, and then they were transported to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, where he spent several months, actually 3 months, because of this public protest. I'm going to take this moment to hear just a few of his own words about his life, now that we have it back.
I grew up on a farm in rural Alabama, about 50 miles from Montgomery. And growing up there during the 40s, I saw those signs that said white men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. I didn't like those signs, and I wanted to do something about it. In 1955, when I was 15 years old, I heard about Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on the radio. And the action of Rosa Parks and the words of Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me. So I wrote this letter to Dr. King. I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell my father, my sisters, my brothers, my teachers. Dr. King wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him.
In 1961, as a participant in the sit-ins of 1959 and 1960, I received an invitation from CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, to participate in the Freedom Rides in 1961. In 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, black people and white people could be seated on a bus. We got off the bus, And we started into a so-called white waiting room. We were beaten by members of the Klan. They beat us. They left us lying in a pool of blood. The local police officials came up, wanted to know whether we wanted to press charges. We said no. We come with peace. We believe in the way of love. We believe in the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence.
The Freedom Rides led to the desegregation of public transportation all across the South. In 1965, a group of young people, students and others, attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, to march 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery, to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people wanted simply to register to vote. And they came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bull whips, tramping us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. At the foot of that bridge, I was beaten. I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw death. But if dying was necessary to make it possible for hundreds and thousands and millions of people to be able to participate in a democratic process, that was the price to pay. My simple message would be, if you find something that you feel very strong about, stand up, speak out, give it your all, push, pull, and as I said from time to time, never ever give up or give in or give out. And whatever you do it with faith and hope and much love.
So I'll just refer briefly to a few of the things that he mentioned that were important moments in his life. The sit-ins, where he spent time in prison as a result at the age of 21. And that was a deeply spiritual time for him as well. He and the others that he was imprisoned with, they were taken to a remote prison. They were none of them from Mississippi. And they were told upon arrival, there are no reporters here, no one to hear your freedom songs. You belong to us. And they were only allowed to wear underwear during their time of incarceration. And he turned that into a moment of inspiration for his fellow prisoners when he said, Gandhi wore rags, and we are in that tradition of Gandhi. He even organized dignified responses to when the prison took away their mattresses as well. They suffered under inhumane circumstances for the principles that they believed in. And that was a formative experience for him that brought him as a leader to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at the age of 23 to speak at the March on Washington as an emblematic of the youth of the country. He was so angry that they wanted to edit his speech, every word of it, but he said out of deference to A. Philip Randolph that he would not ruin this occasion. And he was only sorry that his presence as a young person committed to Christian nonviolence was so threatening to leaders, including even the president at the time, who was sympathetic. They mentioned that the Catholic Archbishop threatened to boycott the march if his speech was not edited to take out words, incendiary words as he called them, like revolution, and references to public protest against police brutality. Nevertheless, he was proud of his speech, and I think you could hear in his words the vision that he had for our country. He had this to say about the march. As for Dr. King's speech, I was not disturbed at all by the message of hope and harmony. I have always believed there is room for both outrage and anger and optimism and love. Many, many times in my life, in many situations and circumstances, I have felt all these emotions at once. I think that this is something that separated me from many of my colleagues in SNCC. The fact that they saw this struggle as an either-or situation, that they believed it was impossible to feel hope and love at the same time as you felt anger and a sense of injustice. But on this day in Washington, D.C., I really did feel hope. Yes, the march was a failure in terms of specifics, in terms of prompting meaningful action, moving the part of the government or moving the segregation of the South. But it was a truly stunning spectacle in terms of showing America and the world the size and strength and the spirit of our movement. You know, sometimes people will remark upon social change or social justice movements, and particularly we of our age, many of us, will note that there are younger people involved in it because of their idealism. And yet sometimes we'll question, well, what is the result of these protests? And I think John Lewis embodied that we don't just do protests to effect an immediate change. We protest for principles that are deeply held because it changes us. And it gives us guidance that we can be, that can be our moral compass throughout our lives. You know, it was just 2 years later that he was at Selma, which was that very public event where he was beaten so severely that he had concussions and suffered lifelong trauma, physical trauma, as a result of the beatings. And he recalls this moment in his memoir. They're on the bridge, several hundred of them. They can't go back. The state troopers are there waiting to mow them down with every kind of weapon, tear gas, horses, other implements, and guns. And this is what he says at that moment. We could have gone forward, marching right into the teeth of those troopers, but that would have been too aggressive. I thought, too provocative. God knew what might have happened if we had done that. These people were ready to be arrested, but I didn't want anyone to get hurt. We couldn't go forward. We couldn't go back. There was only one option left that I could see. We should kneel and pray, he said to his colleague, who nodded. We turned and passed the word back to begin bowing down in a prayerful manner. But the word didn't get far. I didn't have time. 1 minute after he had issued his warning, I know this because I was careful to check my watch. Major Cloud issued an order to the troopers. Troopers, he said, advance. And then all hell broke loose. And you've probably seen descriptions of the blood that was spilled that day for people exercising their right to protest. They did that not only for themselves, but for those who came after. And so I want to lift up that as an example too. He forgave the people in a way that would be very difficult for us, for me, who tried to take his life. And it was a hallmark of his entire lifetime that he believed in forgiveness and reconciliation. I'm not capable of it myself to the same extent, but he has the right. He earned the right, the credibility to be a meaningful ambassador for those values. He was deeply committed to peaceful, nonviolent change, to Gandhian principles. He says this about reflecting on it later. I think there's a myth, some type of fever or something that's running wild on the American scene that gives us the idea that we are so right and that we are so powerful that we should engage as the keepers of the world's record and as the big cop. We are more and more going to different places around the world, and we're going in the name of peace and to stop the spread of communism. We're going to the Congo, to the Dominican Republic, and Vietnam. And after Vietnam, no doubt, we'll be going someplace else, saying that this is part of the peacekeeping effort. And one of the real problems is that our whole economy in this country, in my estimation, is built around war and conflict. We have a war economy, and we hate to do any serious thinking or contemplation about peacetime economy. Somehow the American people must force the government to do the same serious thinking, some serious planning about a peacetime economy and of absorbing the millions of men and women that we have in uniform into our economy. So he spent, I'm running through it, but he spent a lifetime in Congress trying to affect change in policy, as well as a lifetime of activism embodying resistance to white supremacy, anti-racism. And he did so, by all accounts. All of his colleagues, even those who opposed him, said he did it with great grace, with humility, and as the kind of person that they wanted to be like, even when they disagreed with him. What a great tribute for us. I want to show one more little clip from just a couple of years ago when he wrote, when his memoir, March, there's 3 volumes of it, and I'm hoping we'll read it this year. It's a graphic memoir, and I've used it as a book discussion in other places that I've worked, and it's amazing what it will evoke from us, how it will change us. But a few years ago, this book won the National Book Award, and just look at this clip from when he received it. Hmm?
Thank you. This is unreal. This is unbelievable. And I remember in 1956, when I was 16 years old, with some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, going down to the public library, trying to get library cards. And we were told that the library was for whites only and not for colors. And to come here and receive this award, this honor with this, it's too much. But I had a wonderful teacher in elementary school who told me, read, my child, read. And I tried to read everything. I love books.
News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click.
Oh, there we go. So I mentioned he was arrested 45 times, and one of the last times was for a protest in which he participated with fellow Congress people in solidarity with immigrants. This immigrant solidarity action, where he was arrested on the floor of the Congress, he did so because he said, this is what my whole life has been about, making the connections. And I know that we're not all going to get arrested. I myself have never been arrested. I don't know why. I've tried. But he was willing to put it all on the line for what he believed in. And that, I'm hoping, will be an inspiration for us. The last quote I'm going to give is from the end of his memoir, and it's about prayer. You know, he went to seminary and then never got ordained. But as I said, he lived a life of ministry. And he never talked disrespectfully about religion, but his faith changed as a result of being incarcerated. He talks about that. He didn't talk to God the whole time he was in prison, he said. And in fact, he couldn't graduate from seminary because he was in prison in Mississippi. But this is what he says about prayer at the end of his life. On the one hand, on the one hand, prayer to me is an attempt to communicate with a power, with a force, with a being much greater than I am. On the other hand, it is a period of simply having an executive session with yourself. It's a period of being alone, a period of meditation, a period of quiet and just being you. It can be in a public setting. It can happen in a meeting. It can happen while you're flying in a plane or riding in a car or waiting to make a speech, or at almost any time. You hear people from time to time say, I need to steal away and pray. In my own case, I can steal away almost any time. I could be on the elevator. I can be involved in a march or sit in some type of nonviolent protest and still be engaged in prayer. And sometimes I pray when I have nothing very difficult to deal with. You're constantly in prayer to some spirit or some force to help you make the right decision, to give you the courage to follow through or to stand your ground. I don't, as a rule, engage in formal prayer. I pray just like when I was growing up in bed at night. I don't necessarily get down on my knees and say a prayer before going to bed, but sometimes I'm in bed and I pray. I'm always asking somebody, some force, some power, whether it's God Almighty or what I sometimes refer to as the spirit of history, to take care of me, to help me make the right decisions, to see me through something. Sometimes when I have a major statement to make on the floor of the house, I call on that force, that source to help me, to guide me. Prayer is one of the most powerful, well, I don't want to call it a weapon, but it's a tool, an instrument, a way of reaching out that humankind has. We can and do use it to deal with problems and the things and issues that we don't understand, that we don't quite comprehend. It's very hard to separate the essence of prayer and faith. We pray because we believe that praying can make what we believe, our dreams, our visions, come true. And this morning, I just want to invite us, as we go to our time of prayer, to be open to the spirit of history, as he says, to live our lives as tributes to what it means to live out your values, and to renew our commitment as a church, as a congregation in the United Church of Christ in particular, to be an anti-racist, activist, deeply rooted in our Christian faith congregation in the spirit of John Lewis.